Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book Breaking Dawn by Stephenie Meyer, the fourth and final novel in the Twilight saga. Well, I say final. She also released Midnight Sun, but that's like going over the same event, so it's the final book of the original four, if that makes sense. You all know what I mean. This is, a YA paranormal romance series that I've been reading. I've been trying to expand my reading interests. I'm a fantasy, sci-fi, tie-in fiction guy, not so much into YA or romance. So I was like, I'm gonna, branch out, read new genres, and I read Divergent earlier this year, and I loved it, and I wanted to start the Twilight saga as well, which I knew I would get flack for. And actually, I didn't get as much as I thought I would. The first book I read, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it like an 8 out of 10. It was a really enjoyable book, really enjoyable experience. It just never reached that top tier of YA for me. Yeah, so that's, I gave it an 8 out of 10. Very good book. I also read New Moon and Eclipse, and I gave these both the exact same rating. I gave them 7 out of 10. I thought that they had really great moments throughout. I thought it was an enjoyable story, but I had a few issues with the way that the story unfolded in those two books. So I was a little bit nervous about how I would feel about going into Breaking Dawn. Breaking Dawn is also the longest book in the series. I know that they split the movie into the two parts, and so I was curious to see how the book, would unfold. And full disclosure, I watched the movies back in like 2021, having never read the book. So I watched all 5 of the movies, I think there were, and then it's been years since I, revisited. So some of the stuff I remembered, and then some of the stuff I did not, and then some of the stuff is totally different from the movies. And so basically, I went into this hoping it would level up, and thankfully, this book does level up. I think this is. I'll just go ahead and say it's a 9 out of 10 for me. I think this is the best in the series. I think that this is when Stephenie Meyer's writing style really worked for me, and this is when I think that she did both, played it safe in some ways and also took risks, and the risks I think paid off in this book. One of the things that this book does is it splits the story into basically 3 parts. The first quarter of the book is from Bella's perspective. It's the wedding, it's the honeymoon, it's that time after the honeymoon. I'll have to do spoilers in this later on, but there's all that. Then the second quarter of the book features Jacob's perspective, picks up right where Bella's perspective ends, picks up from Jacob's perspective, which was a bold choice because I think that for most people, Jacob was, and including me, was incredibly annoying in Eclipse. I thought I was never team Jacob, but I, was empathetic towards him in New Moon, but in Eclipse he lost all the goodwill that he had. And I felt that, Meyer just was really trying to make everyone team Edward with it. And I just did not like the decisions that Jacob makes in Eclipse. And so I was not particularly excited to read his perspective here. But she actually makes a bit of a change in his character, a little bit change in his focus in his perspective here in the second quarter of the book. And I think that was a great decision. And then the second half of the book goes back to Bella's perspective, and that was where she did the switch was actually really creative. I really thought that was a lot of fun. So I actually think that the risks there, doing Jacob, Bella for point of view was actually really a good move on this on Stephenie Meyer's part. Also, this book has some great dialogue scenes between Jacob and Edward and Bella, which is hilarious because that's what everyone makes fun of these books and movies is the dialogue between the characters. But there were some scenes I was like, I'm actually really liking their dynamic. I was enjoying hearing them talk with each other and figure things out. And I just thought this is particularly towards the middle of the book. And a little bit towards the end, but mostly in the middle of the book. And I was like, this is funny that I'm really enjoying reading. Like, it's because there's no love triangle. Because, obviously, the beginning of the book is Bella marrying Edward. And so, there's nothing for Jacob to do regarding their relationship. So the love triangle ends and their dynamic becomes more of friends. And I thought that was a really nice change for the series. And it made me like Jacob's character more. And it made the dynamic between him and Edward funnier. Like, when Edward would call him mongrel in the book, it didn't feel like it was angry. Like in previous books, it felt like Edward has a little bit of hatred for Jacob, even though he feels like he needs him for the various paranormal things happening. But it felt like it was a hatred. Here, it feels, when he calls him mongrel, it felt like it was more playful and funny. And Jacob would dish it back out. And the way that Jacob would talk with, who was it? Rosalie, and they would have their back and forths, and he would make dumb blonde jokes. It was just hilarious. It was just, I was very much enjoying those scenes. Getting to something a little bit more serious and probably more controversial are the themes in this book, because some of them are more touchy, but that's actually what really elevated the book for me, was the way it handled themes. One is, the first theme is abstinence. Abstinence has been a theme throughout the whole 4-book series, particularly books 3 and 4. And I had book 1 and 2 as well. In the whole series, abstinence has been present, and you have seen at some times Bella has been wanting to go further in her relationship with Edward, and he's kind of pushed back and said, no, it's not the right time, we have to wait for marriage. And then there's also had the reverse. There's been a few times where Edward seemed a little bit more interested in progressing their relationship too fast, and Bella said no. But the point is that it was set up essentially from Meyer that there was virtue in them waiting for marriage. And I was very happy that she pays that off in this book, and she establishes the virtue of waiting for marriage and all that stuff with their dynamic. So first of all, that's, you don't get that often in YA. Normally you glorify the sexual activity and things like that. The traditional values are not as glorified here, or usually, but they are here, which was nice. Also, you literally read about a honeymoon, the events of it, and so, but yet surprisingly, Stephenie Meyer stays unusually appropriate with it. Obviously, things are happening, it, like you read about the scenes, but she just has a way of keeping it from getting explicit, from getting, very R-rated. She keeps it very appropriate. It's still like to the point where it's like, for instance, I had a student in my class that was reading this series, and the student was probably like 12, and I'd still feel a little uncomfortable with a 12-year-old reading this, but it's not like some of the books that I've read, even YA books, when the explicitness comes in, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I was very surprised at Meyer's restraint, and it shows a level of the craft that you can still write romance, and you could even still, between a married couple, write those things happening in the relationship without it getting explicit, like, say, Ken Follett does with his books. So anyway, that's that whole thing. One of the other themes in the book that I really appreciated, and am really surprised that Stephenie Meyer got away with in this book, is a very pro-life theme. And in here, I'm going to have to delve into some light spoilers. So if you want to know nothing about Breaking Dawn, which how could you not know? I mean, it's like, even before I even watched the movie, I knew this storyline before I even read the book. But if you don't want to know, just warning you, I'm going into spoilers for a little bit. But in this book, Bella and Edward end up having a child. Renesmee, also known as Nessie, which, by the way, hilarious. Every time they called her Nessie, I was just cracking up. I was like, that is an awful nickname and also hilarious at the same time. And eventually Bella just goes with it. But Renesmee is born. And what Stephenie Meyer does is use the topics of pro-life, but also mask it with like this kind of paranormal storyline. Because of the nature of the book, you have the whole thing about a vampire and a human, and how dangerous it is for a human to have a vampire's child, and how lethal it could be. And there's all these problems that it presents that kind of, at some ways, mirror problems that happen with real childbirth and things like that, but in a very different way. We don't have to drink blood, or women don't have to drink blood when they have babies, but still, like, there's the problems of childbirth, and some books and movies would present the option to get rid of the baby, and even it's interesting that the villains in the book, their goal is to kill the child. In the womb, after she's born, whatever. their goal is to kill the child. And I think it's easier to disagree with the villains when the child is already born, because it's like physically there in front of you. But even, the pro-life ideas are even present, and Bella's insistent that she's going to have the child. There's no the other option just never really occurs to her. And I appreciated that Meyer handles it deftly. Some people may not have picked up on that at all. Some people may have picked up on it and not cared. Even pro-choice people might have been okay with the way this is handled. But I appreciate that Meyer attempted to handle this in the way she did, and she was still deft with the material. And I just thought that was a really cool theme to explore, because you do not see that in YA as well. I do know, I will not call out the name of the author, but I do know one author who specifically wrote an entire YA novel because she was angry about pro-life laws, that she wanted to make a pro-choice YA novel, which, totally up to her. That's fine for her to do that. But it was, very on the nose and very, very direct. And so it's interesting to see the other side of this in YA, and to see it's much more masked here. It's much more subtle than the other one was. So also, regarding the ending of the book, the movie's ending, which I think is pretty controversial anyway, is very different than the book's ending. And I was very surprised at how much more talky the book ending is, and how much, and how what the impetus for figuring out the solution to the problem is so different in the book than it is in the movie. And I thought it was really creative in the book. And I thought it was interesting in the movie. So I don't dislike either one. I just thought it was very creative. So basically, those are my thoughts on Breaking Dawn. I actually really enjoyed this one. Again, I gave it like a 9 out of 10. I think it's the best in the series. It's the one book in the series that truly feels like great YA to me. As a whole, I don't know where the series ranks when I can compare it to other YA series, but I'll say this. Your goal is to stick the landing, and she stuck the landing. And so, I applaud Stephenie Meyer for that. So that is my review of Breaking Dawn. If you've read Breaking Dawn by Stephenie Meyer, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.